everyone. Thanks for joining us. We have a terrific show today. James Cushing will read the poetry of W.H. Auden, and John Towey will read the poetry of John Michael Lubbock.
Scott Michael Lubbock.
James Cushing, born 1953 in Palo Alto, California, holds a doctorate in English from UC Irvine. From 1989 through 2020, when he retired, he taught literature and creative writing at Cal Poly, SLO, and served as a community's poet laureate from 2008 to 2010. Cushing's 35-year association with Cahuenga Press has resulted in 7 full-length collections of poetry, the most recent of which is Tangled Hologram. His daughter is a New York-based poet, Iris Cushing. A major figure in 20th century literature, British-American poet W.H. Auden, 1907-1973, was a prolific writer of poems, prose essays, and reviews on literary, political, psychological, and religious subjects. And he worked at various times on documentary films, poetic plays, and other forms of performance. He won the Pulitzer Prize in 1947. Joseph Brodsky once stated that Auden had the greatest mind of the 20th century. Here's a brilliant poet scholar, James Cushing.
Thank you so much, Harry, for inviting me to have this wonderful experience sharing Auden's poetry with you. Auden, one of the major figures in 20th century poetry, often spoken of in the same sentence with T.S. Eliot because of the interesting symmetry in their careers. Eliot was American who spent most of his adult life in England, and Auden was British who spent most of his adult life in the United States, specifically New York. And I want to begin with a poem that Auden wrote during his time in the United States, something from 1950. Auden wrote a number of poems that became very famous and very well known. This, unfortunately, is not one of them, although I hope in my own small way to help make it become so. It might be because people are put off by the title, which is Dichtung und Wahrheit, a German term borrowed from Goethe that means poetry and truth. And it's a prose poem, unlike most of Auden's poems. And I think you'll find that it takes you places that you haven't been before. Dichtung und Wahrheit by W.H. Auden. Expecting your arrival tomorrow, I find myself thinking, I love you. Then comes the thought, I should like to write a poem which would express exactly what I mean when I think these words. Of any poem written by someone else, my first demand is that it be good. Who wrote it is of secondary importance. Of any poem written by myself, my first demand is that it be genuine, recognizable, like my handwriting, as having been written, for better or worse, by me. When it comes to his own poems, a poet's preferences and those of his readers often overlap, but seldom coincide. But this poem, which I should now like to write, would not only have to be good and genuine. If it is to satisfy me, it must also be true. I read a poem by someone else in which he bids a tearful farewell to his beloved. The poem is good. It moves me as other good poems do. And genuine, I recognize the poet's handwriting. Then I learn from a biography that, at the time he wrote it, the poet was sick to death of the girl, but pretended to weep in order to avoid hurt feelings in the scene. Does this information affect my appreciation of his poem? Not in the least. I never knew him personally, and his private life is no business of mine. Would it affect my appreciation if I had written the poem myself? I hope not. I hope so. It would not be enough that I should believe that what I had written was true. To satisfy me, the truth of this poem must be self-evident. It would have to be written, for example, in such a way that no other reader could misread, I love you as I love you. If I were a composer, I believe I could produce a piece of music which would express to a listener what I mean when I think of the word love. But it would be impossible for me to compose it in such a way that he would know that this love was felt for you, not for God, not for my mother, not for the decimal system. The language of music is, as it were, intransitive. And it is just this intransitivity which makes it meaningless for a listener to ask, does this composer really mean what he says, or is he only pretending? If I were a painter, I believe I could paint a portrait that would express to an onlooker what I mean when I think the word you, beautiful, lovable, etc. But it would be impossible for me to paint it in such a way that he would know that I loved you. The language of painting lacks, as it were, the active voice. And it is just this objectivity which makes it meaningless for an onlooker to ask, is this really a portrait of N, not of a young boy, a judge, or a locomotive in disguise? The symboliste attempt to make poetry as intransitive as music can go no further than the narcissistic reflexive, I love myself. The attempt to make poetry as objective as painting can get no further than the single comparison, A is like B, C is like D, E is like F. No imagiste poem can be more than a few words long. As an artistic language, speech has many advantages. 3 persons, 3 tenses. Music and painting have only the present tense. Both the active and the passive voice, but it has one serious defect. It lacks the indicative mood. All its statements are in the subjunctive and only possibly true until verified, which is not always possible, by nonverbal evidence. First, I write, I was born in York. Then I write, I was born in New York. To discover which statement is true and which false, it is no use studying my handwriting. I can't imagine a forger clever enough to imitate another's signature so exactly that a handwriting expert would swear in court that it was genuine. But I cannot imagine a forger so clever that he could imitate his own signature inexactly enough to make a handwriting expert swear it was a forgery. Or is it only that I cannot imagine the circumstances into which anyone would want to do such a thing? In the old days, a poet normally wrote in the third person, and his normal subject was the deeds of others. The use of the first person he reserved for invoking the muses or reminding his prince that it was payday. Even then, he spoke not as himself, but in his professional capacity as a bard. In any case, this poem I should like to write is not concerned with the proposition he loves her, where he and she could be fictitious persons whose characters in history the poet is free to idealize as much as she chooses. But with my proposition, I love you, where I and you are persons whose existence and histories could be verified by a private detective. It is a grammatical convention of the English language that a speaker should refer to himself as I, and to the person he is addressing as you. But there are many situations in which a different convention would serve equally well. It might be the rule, for example, when making polite conversation with strangers or when addressing public officials to use the third person. Mr. Smith likes cats, doesn't Miss Jones? Can the honorable conductor tell the humble passenger when this train leaves? There are many situations, that is to say, in which the use of the pronoun I and you is not accompanied by the I feeling or the you feeling. The I feeling, a feeling of being responsible for. It cannot accompany a verb in the passive. I wake in the morning with a violent headache and cry, oh. The cry is involuntary and devoid of I feeling. Then I think, I have a hangover. Some degree of I feeling accompanies this thought. The act of locating and identifying the headache is mine, but very little. Then I think, whoa, I drank way too much last night. Now the I feeling has gotten much stronger. I could have drunk less. A headache has become my hangover, an incident in my personal history. I cannot identify my hangover by pointing to my head and groaning, for what makes it mine is my past act, and I cannot point to myself yesterday. The you feeling, a feeling of attributing responsibility to. If, when I think you are beautiful, this thought is accompanied by the you feeling, I mean that I hold you responsible, in part at least, for your physical appearance. It is not merely due to a lucky combination of genes. Common to both the I and the you feeling, a feeling of being in the middle of a story. I cannot think I love you without including the thoughts, I have already loved you, if only for a moment, and I shall still love you, if only for a moment. If, therefore, I attempt, as I should like to do in this poem, to express what I mean by this thought, I turn myself into a historian faced with a historian's problems. Of the documents at my disposal, memories of myself, of you, of what I've heard on the subject of love, some have probably been doctored. Some may even be downright forgeries. Where I have no documents, I cannot tell if this is because they never existed or because they've been lost or hidden. And if so, what difference it would make to my historical picture if they could be recovered. Even if I were gifted with total recall, I should still be faced with the task of interpreting them and assessing their relative importance. If we were total strangers, so that the possibility of a you feeling on either side were excluded, and accosting you in the street, I were to say, I love you, you would not only understand exactly what I was saying, but also have no doubts that I meant it. You would never think, is this man deceiving himself or lying to me? Of course, you might be wrong. I might be accosting you in order to win a bet or make someone else jealous. But we are not strangers. And that is not what I meant, or not all that I meant. Whatever I may mean could not be equally well conveyed by gestures, but can be expressed, if at all, in speech. That is why I wish to write this poem. And whenever speech is necessary, lying and self-deception are both possible. I can pretend to others that I'm not hungry when I am. I feel ashamed to admit I cannot afford a decent meal. Or that I am hungry when I am not. My hostess's feelings will be hurt if I don't eat. But am I hungry or not? How hungry am I? It is difficult to imagine being uncertain or self-deceived as to the true answer. I am slightly hungry. I am very hungry. I am starving. It is clear that I am speaking of 3 degrees of the same appetite. I love you a bit. I love you a lot. I love you madly. Am I still speaking of different degrees or different kinds? My love, says the poet, is more wonderful, more beautiful, more to be desired than. There follows a list of admirable natural objects and human artifacts. More wonderful, I should like to say, than Swaldale or the coast of Northwest Ireland. More beautiful than a badger, a seahorse, or a turbine built by Gilks and Company of Kendal. More to be desired than buttered toast for breakfast and unlimited hot water. What do such comparisons provide? Certainly not a description by which you could be distinguished from 100 possible rivals of a similar type. The one I worship has more soul than other folks. Much funnier, I should like to say. To be accurate, should not the poet have written, than any I have met so far? I will love you forever, swears the poet. I find this easy to swear too. I will love you at 4:15 p.m. next Tuesday. Is that still so easy? I will love you whatever happens, even though, and here there follows a list of catastrophic miracles. Even though, I should like to say, all the stones of Baalbek split into exact quarters, the rooks of Repton utter dire prophecies in Greek, and the windrush bellow imprecations in Hebrew, time run Braustefan, and Paris and Vienna thrice be lit again by gas. Do I believe that any of these events might conceivably occur during my lifetime? Well, if not, what have I promised? I will love you whatever happens, even though you put on 30 pounds and grow a mustache. Dare I promise that? This poem that I wished to write was to have expressed exactly what I mean when I think the words, I love you. But I cannot know exactly what I mean. It was to have been self-evidently true, but words cannot verify themselves. So, this poem must remain unwritten. That doesn't matter. Tomorrow you will be arriving. If I were writing a novel in which both of us were characters, I know exactly how I would greet you at the station. Adoration in the eye, on the tongue, banter and bawdy. But who knows exactly how I shall greet you? Dame kind? Now, there's an idea. Couldn't one write a poem, slightly unpleasant perhaps, about her? Dichtung und Wahrheit by W.H. Auden. I think I have time to read one or maybe two of his greatest hits. Let me go right to the main stem and read his great 3-part poem called "In Memory of W.B. Yeats," who died in January of 1939, shortly before Auden emigrated. In memory of W.B. Yeats. He disappeared in the dead of winter. The brooks were frozen. The airports almost deserted. And snow disfigured the public statues. The mercury sank in the mouth of the dying day. What instruments we have agree. The day of his death was a dark, cold day. Far from his illness, the wolves ran on through the evergreen forests. The peasant river was untempted by the fashionable quays. By mourning tongues, the death of the poet was kept from his poems. But for him, it was his last afternoon as himself, an afternoon of nurses and rumors. The provinces of his body revolted. The squares of his mind were empty. Silence invaded the suburbs. The current of his feeling failed. He became his admirers. Now he is scattered among 100 cities and wholly given over to unfamiliar affections, to find his happiness in another kind of wood and be punished under a foreign code of conscience. The words of a dead man are modified in the guts of the living. But in the importance and noise of tomorrow, when the brokers are roaring like beasts on the floor of the bourse, and the poor have the sufferings to which they are fairly accustomed, and each in the cell of himself is almost convinced of his freedom, a few thousand will think of this day as one thinks of a day when one did something slightly unusual. What instruments we have agree the day of his death was a dark, cold day. 2. You were silly, like us. Your gift survived it all. The perish of rich women, physical decay, yourself. Mad Ireland hurt you into poetry. Now Ireland has her madness and her weather still. For poetry makes nothing happen. It survives in the valley of its making, where executives would never want to tamper. Flows on south from ranches of isolation and the busy griefs, raw towns that we believe and die in. It survives, a way of happening, a mouth. 3. Earth, receive an honored guest. William Yeats is laid to rest. Let the Irish vessel lie emptied of its poetry. In the nightmare of the dark, all the dogs of Europe bark, and the living nations wait, each sequestered in its hate. Intellectual disgrace stares from every human face, and the seas of pity lie locked and frozen in each eye. Follow, poet. Follow right to the bottom of the night. With your unconstraining voice, still persuade us to rejoice. With the farming of a verse, make a vineyard of the curse. Sing of human unsuccess in a rapture of distress. Let the deserts of the heart, let the healing fountains start. In the prison of his days, teach the free man how to praise. Two poems by W.H. Auden, Dichtung and Wahrheit, and in memory of W.B. Yeats.
Thank you, Jim, for such an erudite, insightful reading of W.H. Auden. You know, he once said that whatever else it may or not be, I want every poem I write to be a hymn in praise of the English language. And you said he was you quoted a person saying he was the brightest mind of the 20th century, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for, that. I love those poems that you read. And the first poem is almost like Ars Poetica.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Telling us how just taking a simple phrase, I love you. And you just read that beautifully as you did the second one with all its variations and the rhythms at the end, and in the deserts of the heart, let the healing begin. Something.
Oh man, mm-hmm.
I love that, and that's to all of us too, And he just breaks our heart open and makes us try to be better people. And I love Auden, just as much as you do. And he was one of our greats. And I returned to him over and over again, and he just had such a mastery of all the different types of forms. Just take about 2 minutes, Jim, before I introduce John Towey, and just say, what is it, do you think, that makes Auden such a great poet?
Oh, good Lord! Of course, there's an indescribable mystery in every great poet. Each truly great one, from Sappho and Homer on up to the present, have some unique, intuitive relationship between language and the mind and the heart that they're able to represent clearly in paper and speech. But what I like particularly about Auden is that he never, even after a Pulitzer Prize, even after being lionized, even after being honored in every possible way, he never adopted an insider's position as a poet or in American literature. He always maintained his distance and his independence and his willingness to trust only his own counsel, and it's that radical independence that I think made him much more comfortable in the United States than he would have been in the Great Britain where he grew up. And he was a legendary figure in New York, legendary for his eccentricities, legendary for the parties he would throw with his various partners. And of course he chose John Ashbery's first book for the Yale Prize, so he started that career off. So yeah. I've been a fan ever since I first came across one of his poems, As I Went Out One Evening.
Well, thank you, Jim. We always learn from you. I can see how great you are as a teacher. I've been in your classes a couple of times.
Oh, yes, I remember.
And you're just such a brilliant mind. You're one of the most brilliant poet scholars I know. So thank you once again, James Cushing. John Towey is a resident here at MPTF and has made his living as an actor for 50 years. He worked for 3 seasons each at the Arena Stage in Washington, D.C., the Guthrie Theater in Minneapolis, and the Public Theater in New York City. Since moving to L.A. with his family in 1990, he has appeared in 35 television shows, a few films, and acted in 3 Shakespeare shows at the Amundsen Theater, directed by Sir Peter Hall, who invited him to be in his revival of Amadeus on Broadway for 5 months. He will be reading Scott Michael Lubbock, who is a 77-year-old poet who has been writing for 70 years, encouraged by walking deer trails in the hills behind his childhood home. He spent 23 years as an educator, teaching English and special education before moving to Eugene, Oregon. For the past 20 years, he has lived with his wife, Maggie, regularly attending the Church of the Water in their kayaks or walking by local rivers. Here's a wonderful actor, John Towey.
Thanks, Harry. I'm just going to start. Japanese Garden, the path below the Koyasan Monastery. I do not remember if her parasol opened to sun or rain. One image from Kyoto I've held for more than 50 years. A young woman in a white kimono, simply trimmed with eggshell blue silk, stepped from a rickshaw, adjusted her obi, then opens a parasol in the same white and blue before walking gracefully through the garden where I stand by a clear koi pond watching. She moved slowly, easily, exactly as I once dreamed of moving through my own life. It's called the Japanese Garden. Easter story. This morning, Easter morning, the sun queued for wonder, unfolding a few tulips and daffodils that have crept out from under the shade trees of our yard. We do not hide eggs or anything else we are fortunate enough to share. It's hard enough to find what we seek without more secrets and more cleverness. I'll tell you what I want this morning. For Skylar the cat to rise from his grave, purr on my chest, wrap his soft paws around my neck the way he once did. He who, deaf and blind, wandered from our familiar home near the end of his life, who was lost in the wind and rain for 23 days before he was found and returned to us. He who spent the final 4 months of his life back on my chest, purring each night, his paws around my neck again, as if he'd never left. What was it like? I asked him. Did our sorrowful prayers call you back from somewhere else that you wanted to be? His answer was always the same, pushing his warm face against my cheek. Oops, just dropped a poem. This is called Details Matter. The mouse in the corn crib is God. So too the cat that toys with and then swallows it. The waterfall in the stone it tumbles to perfect roundness. Each God and the work of God. The one-legged bookshop owner and the boy in the blue ball cap looking for a book on dinosaurs. I thank them for the world. The mother who bore me less than perfect and loved me. She knew the beginning of the universe and then forgot the details without shame. She remembered her mother's recipe for a risotto milanese, which is a pinch of saffron, and prepared it for our family, even after she had difficulty seeing the flames of the old gas stove. And finding the wooden spoon she saved only for that perfect dish. Assessing my health. The home health assessment physician's assistant gave me 3 words to remember. Then she had instructed me to draw the face of an analog clock showing the time as 8:20. I told her I preferred 8:05, my favorite song by Moby Grape, but I did as directed, and my exceptionally neat execution was rewarded with a smile. Quote, now repeat the 3 words. And I did. We briefly but surprisingly thoroughly reviewed my chronic severe depression, childhood trauma, seasonal challenges of the Northwest, political and social currencies. Well managed, she nodded. My active life, morning gym routine and frequent walks, my work and gardening, kayaking, changes in diet, dropping me out of pre-diabetic glucose level, merited congratulations and encouragement. She advised me against rough water kayaking, not stopping Paxil abruptly, or going up on the roof. Quote, you can hire people for that. I was reminded to breathe squarely if I get anxious and just talk to someone. Heaven, mountain, daughter. Easily remembered in spite of the fear of tests and failure. Nailed it. I keep clear inventories of my blessings and my gratitude. Someday, my daughter and I will climb a mountain together. I will continue alone until I reach heaven. How to dress a poem. Mom's scolding in response to early poems. Never hang out our dirty family laundry for the neighbors to see. What is poetry if not secrets and discoveries? Eventually, we become old clotheslines where what is hung to dry in the sun is only that which has not yet blown away. The fine linens and ball gowns danced away on the wind long ago. The sheets and towels made a brief flap and quickly disappeared. In the end, undergarments, clearly exposed, hang on for dear life like the bare truth. Now, the muses laugh. We're finally getting somewhere. Clear Lake, golden in late afternoon sun, breasts tipped with fire. She stands naked in a drift boat. One arm rises in a graceful arc of a cast. Her shining hair drifts in unison with the fine filament of her fishing line. Perfectly balanced, she whips her wrist and casts again. My breath held, kayak still, in clear water close to shore. I'm half blinded by reflections of sunlight on the small waves pushed by wind. Uncertain at this distance, my imagination is set free. A delightful trick or a very generous gift of light. Bus ride. The tour bus met our river ship early, where we were moored on the Rhine, setting out towards Heidelberg Castle, and a guided tour followed by lunch. The driver pointed out a few sites of interest, suggesting we relax and enjoy the countryside. After some initial chatter among passengers, most were quiet. By now, most of the travelers knew a bit about each other, recognized couples, had figured out who was friendly, who preferred their own company. One couple rarely spoke to others or even between themselves, though when necessary, they seemed to speak and understand English, which most spoke. As the bus rolled along, nearly everyone seemed to have dozed off, or at least had closed their eyes to the blur of vineyards, content to accept their travelers' fatigue. The quiet woman remained awake, her head moving from side to side, as if she were listening to music that no one else heard. A peaceful smile on her lips, and then she arose abruptly, but without disturbing her napping companion, and moved to an empty seat near the unoccupied rear of the bus. She slipped off her sandals, pulled her feet up onto the seat, allowing her loose sundress to ride up bare thighs, exposing the triangle of dark hair between her legs. One breast slipped free, her dark nipple erect. From her purse, she carefully removed and unwrapped a tampon, gently spread her labia, and guided the tampon in so that only the short string still showed. She sat motionless for several seconds, rubbing herself softly, silent words shaping her mouth, holding unfaltering eye contact with the one observer before turning her gaze to the fields. DACA, capital D, capital A, capital C, capital A, means Deferred Action of Childhood Arrivals. The young man's brown face fills the TV screen. He describes his life as a child smuggled into our country by his parents, fleeing violence in El Salvador. He points his hand like a gun, his eyes wide with memory. Bang, bang. He says, hermana, sister. The interviewer asks him what he likes best about America. There's confusion, a brief exchange in Spanish with the interpreter who says, Los Estados Unidos. Ah, yes, says the interpreter. What do you like best about the United States? The young man replies rapidly in Spanish. El Joven says he loves cars, how their owners wash, wax, and vacuum them, wipe them down, and park them like treasures that have their own rooms to sleep in, and swimming pools filled with wonderfully clear, clean water to play in, water that irrigates nothing. How men look like him, clean and vacuum those pools, mow lawns and weed gardens where there's nothing to eat. He finds that funny. And pets, how people here feed and groom dogs and cats like children. Even take them to doctors in their clean cars. Shaking his head in disbelief, he describes a lady walking a pig on a leash. Asked what kind of life he dreams of, he says, I dream of being an American dog. Stroke of luck. He was certain they were still driving toward the ocean, the road dipping, rising, winding between the trees, leaning into autumn. But his steering wheel, held tightly in his hands, suddenly smelled strongly of lavender. And the memory of everything he'd eaten that morning, the eggs and coffee and toast, and even the blackberry jam, tasted bright orange. Maybe I've never been on this road before, he thought. And he smelled lemons everywhere. The woman sitting quietly beside him in the passenger seat, as she had for years, exploded like shards of glass, like a stained glass church window blown apart and reassembled in slow motion. She smelled like chocolate. He could even taste her hair, and he fell deeply in love with his wife again. But he could not remember their phone number. If she'd not then been there beside him, he could not have called her to say, I love you. They would joke about it later, how he had been so good with numbers all of his life, but could not now remember even a simple combination of them. She would say it with affection, never mentioning how much more tenderly he now touched her, talked to her, watched her since the drive to the beach that day, when he winced slightly, held his hand to his cold forehead for just an instant and smiled at her as if he'd never seen her before. And each morning since, he would awaken wondering, what will this day smell like? What flavor will today be? As if addressing the tiny glowing ember waiting quietly in his brain, just behind his dark eyes. When she finished, she never visited the densely forested mountainous region to the west of her home in Henan province, and only once put her foot in the Yellow River, which she was told as a child flows forever through China. She didn't know about one of the world's largest and most famous collections of Buddhist carvings housed there. The only thing Zhang Min remembered doing forever was working at the Zhenzhou Honest Clothes Factory, where she began as a girl sewing the left sleeve onto hundreds of shirts a day, always the left sleeve, year after year. She didn't recall ever seeing a complete shirt. Oh, did I tell you that her name means quick? When sewing for a manufacturer of cheap clothing, it's important to be quick and exact because there are worse jobs, even in that factory. And after years of carefully pulling fabric under the threaded needle, reliable workers, sometimes married, moved out of the crowded dormitories where shifts traded beds, those exhausted after hours of work falling asleep on the same sheets where others just arose to take their places at the whirring machines. Zhang Min finally had a small 2-room apartment, 1 room for sleeping with her 3 children and a husband who came home twice each year from construction jobs in another province. To share a bowl of noodles and a bit of chicken with her family was a rare and marvelous treat. She became a white-haired old woman who worked until shortly before her death when her family and a few friends met briefly in remembrance. A dutiful but still loving ceremony. Her eldest child, a son who had received an education and worked in an office, had a small apartment and family of his own, told those gathered that he once had asked his mother about the shirts she sewed, if he had ever worn one. She smiled and said she did not know because she had never finished anything. What we hoped we'd find on the moon. Just checking the clock. Got some time. What we hoped we'd find on the moon. We surrender our titles when we meet in the fabrications of sleep or walk with the dead beside the endless river of stars. There's no reason to stand on ceremony. Jack Kennedy and I weep together in a dream about what we imagine we will find on the other side of the moon. I wake only to find myself an old man. Astronauts do not bring back our hopes and dreams, do not bring home the sun or even the moon, only rocks, dust, not even clay from which to mold better men. Jack admits he has seen Marilyn's tits, but even in constant pain, he believed they were a hopeful sign. Quote, but I didn't see Vietnam coming. Cities burning with hate or dogs attacking helpless children. Collapsed towers ripping open the sky to admit wars that killed for decades. I did not see Jackie covered in my blood. Jack, I say, we all hoped for more on the far side of the moon. No one saw the bullet that shattered the dream, that set the trajectory of events to follow. The day that Jack was suddenly erased, I was a high school kid painting green and gold signs for a pep rally that night, imagining our earnest cheering would go on forever. I don't remember if we won that football game or if I touched a pom-pom girl's breast, but I do remember draft numbers pulled like raffle tickets on a black and white TV. Oh, I remember the body counts. Vietnam, Watts, AIDS, school shootings, Iraq and Afghanistan, opioids. And I see police kneeling on the necks of the powerless. I bear witness to lakes drying up and forests ablaze, to glaciers retreating and high tides stealing the shoreline. Thick smoke between us and whatever still shines in the night sky. I tally the lopsided score of coronavirus versus fools. And unable to sleep, I weep with Jack. Morning coffee. The last time I danced, I never imagined it would be the last time I danced. When the song ended, I didn't think, well, that's that, planning to set out all the rest. When our arms loosened and we stood back from each other, yes, there was a we. I did not know the scent of your neck, the rhythm of your breath in my right ear would only be memories that I would never need to write both notes we leave for each other by the coffee pot every morning. One more. It's called If I Leave. If I leave, I'll say it's because of the unwashed cat food spoon in the sink. Open drawers or cabinet doors in the dark. The washing machine door closed instead of left open to prevent mildew between loads of laundry. The wasteful accumulation of refillable Camelback water bottles and several pairs of shoes scattered about the family room. Empty envelopes left on the counter within a few feet of the recycling bin. I will invent a litany of reasons to go, appear shallow, petty, and foolish, rather than admit the truth. The grief of being old, sere, untouched, fear of being repugnant, which is not the same as being unloved. The prelude to invisibility, the pain of being a living memory more than a forgotten joy. Yet I will not leave. I'm one who stays. For the met eyes and subtle smile, a brief collision of hips turning over in bed to find the best position for sleep before saying, good night, love. That's it, Harry.
Thank you, John, for such a luminous reading, empathetic reading of Scott Michael Lubbock's poetry, and for leading us away into his poetry. His poetry, as he used the term, generous gifts of light, and he talked about also secrets and discoveries.
Yes,
he has such a large range, of reality. There's warmth, there's death, there's war, there's travel, there's people. And you just did a marvelous job of that. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Harry.
What would you like to tell us about why that you are attracted to his poetry?
Well, I'm attracted to his poetry because I'm attracted to him. I met him and his wife in Ashland, Oregon, many, many years ago at the Shakespeare summer festival they have up there. And we happened to be sitting next to one another. And we both discovered that we were both in a 12-step program, which he's still a big part of. And so we became friends and actually went up to see him one time in Eugene. And I love his poetry, and I love him and his wife, Maggie.
Well, we have about 2 minutes left. So since you just finished, John, why don't you say a few things about the poetry of Auden that Jim read? And then when you get through, Jim, say a few words about Scott Michael Lubbock's poetry. John?
I actually was busy working on this poetry, so I didn't listen to all of the Auden poetry. So I don't really have anything to say, although I love his poetry. It's so personal, as this guy's poetry is very specific and very personal. Scott's poetry.
Jim, what would you like to say about Lubbock's poetry?
It was an entirely new name to me, so I didn't have any context really with which to come to it, other than the very careful, accurately descriptive language and the sense of drama that I think John's reading emphasized very effectively and very beautifully.
Thank you.
Well, we're grateful to hear, the old and the new. I remember years ago, Lincoln Center, Kazan and Clymer and a few others started the National Theater at Lincoln Center in the hope that there would be a company that would do the plays of classic theater and then new theater, experimental theater. And that's what we have here today. We have a great traditional poet of the 20th century and then a new person to us. So that's what this show is for in part two. So that's really good. And Jim and John, why don't you each take a minute? We have about 2 or 3 minutes left to just tell us, Jim and then John, what is important to you in poetry?
What's important to me in poetry is the balance between clarity and mystery. I want to know exactly what the poet is trying to say, and at the same time, I want him to respect me enough to understand that it's none of my business what he's trying to. I don't know if I'm putting this very well, but I think there has to be a certain amount of mystery in a poem that keeps me coming back to it, that keeps me finding new levels of its beauty and its resonance. This is why I like poetry that some people call, quote, difficult, unquote, like, Hart Crane or something like that, because it keeps on giving and giving. So that's the first thing that I would say.
John?
Over to you, John.
Well, I concur with what you said. The clarity and also the mystery, and the thing about Scott's poetry, it's so personal, and yet kind of some of it has a universality too. It's I don't know how to even describe it. It's clear. He makes it clear. With it, it's still a bit of mystery involved.
Well, and time after time, both in my own writing and in my own reading, I've been reminded that the only true way to attain anything universal is through the particular.
Sure.
Myth tells us that. Homer and Sappho teach us that. Frank O'Hara teaches that. It's the only way for us to find what's truly human is to go into our own true humanity, which consists of, the little details.
Yeah.
And of an acceptance of the fact that life consists of all the little things that happen to us, minute after minute, day after day, and no one can keep track of it all.
Yeah.
And
how do you like that?
And Blake said, particulars are geniuses and generalizations are idiots. So
that's right.
I love that.
Poets are always,
right.
Actors always deal with the specific and poets with the particular. Thank you both for a wonderful reading.
You're welcome.
Love it.
Thanks, Harry.
When each
Thank
one
you,
of
Harry.
you comes back onto the show. Next Tuesday, we have a wonderful, vibrant, luminous poet, Pam Ward, who will be with us for the full hour. In the first half hour, she'll read her poetry, and the second, her prose. And she is a chronicler of LA and a singer. So thank you, John Towey, James Cushing, and here's our wonderful director, Jennifer Clymer.
Thank you, Harry. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. Please tune in, as always, for Harry's Poetry Hour. But I think we can all agree Pam Ward is such a dynamic interpreter of the LA experience. And to have her for a full hour, it's going to be incredible.